A reading from the book The Kingdom of Heaven Taken by Prayer, or an account of the author's translation from the kingdom of Satan to the kingdom of God. The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. Matthew 11, verse 12. The author is William Huntington, 1745 to 1813. After many ramblings about the country, I went and settled at last at Mortlake in Surrey, where the effectual work of drawing me from the world began to operate on my soul. I had lost my child by sudden death, as is related in my book, The Bank of Faith. My wife went to nurse a lying-in woman at Barnes, at a little distance from Mortlake, and during her stay at that place I was left entirely alone, both at my work and at my home. As I was one day at my labor, I was reflecting on the many sicknesses, soul troubles, extreme poverty, and disappointments which I had met with in the course of my life. I considered the poor, tried, troubled state I was then in, together with the loss of my child, and my being almost an utter stranger in a strange place. And upon a proper view of the whole, I murmured and fretted at my hard fate, and thought I might adopt the language of good old Jacob, and say, "Few and evil have my days been." But suddenly it was impressed with power on my mind that all these evils were brought upon me for my sin, and that I neither knew, feared, loved, nor served God as I ought to do, and therefore had brought these trials on myself, and that it was a great mercy God did not take me instead of the infant. This impression was attended with an uncommon flow of contrition, insomuch that I was at times overwhelmed with the sorrowful spirit, and so dissolved into meekness that I went weeping and mourning all the day long until my soul was as a weaned child. This frame of spirit was attended chiefly with self-pity, because I had, by sin, exposed myself to so many hardships in this life, and for aught I then knew, to more in the next. I was, however, at times a little tinctured with godly sorrow to think I had so much offended the Almighty, and this is accompanied with a fear that he would not be pacified toward me. Under these workings of mine, I began secretly to call on the name of the Lord in prayer, and embraced every opportunity that offered itself. My petitions were such as I had learned out of books, with some expressions of my own, which I used in confession, as no form seemed to be sufficient to suit the complicated diseases of my troubled mind. This heavy, gloomy frame of soul was attended with a twofold blessing, for my heart being pregnant with compunction drove me perpetually to God in prayer, and in pouring out my soul before God I found I had ease in my mind until I got under a fresh reflection of past offenses, and a future view of the effects as the just rewards of sin. Then my heart conceived again her fresh burden, and I evidently found that there was no release to be had but on my knees before God, where I could speak so as to be eased. The other blessing that attended me under this oppression of soul was that it weaned me from company. I was naturally of a cheerful disposition, which entangled me in the company of many acquaintances. But when I began to be a little habituated to these gloomy regions of death, I found that all my anxiety after, love to, and delight in company was quite blasted, so that my spirit withered like the green herb to all the joys of mortals. Rural retirement seemed most agreeable to me, as it best suited my bewildered state of mind, till at length I began to detest all company, and fly from all my acquaintances. I dwelt like a sparrow alone on the housetops, or like the pelican of the wilderness, or an owl of the desert, finding my spirit dead to all society, and no ease to my soul, but on my knees before God in private. I earnestly solicited the Almighty to keep me from all fellowship with the wicked, having, as I thought, accumulated guilt enough already. In answer to this, it was suggested, as a voice to my best attention, that I must quit that place in which I dwelt, with all my companions, and never more have fellowship with any worldly company whatsoever. This impression sunk so deep on my mind that it never could be erased by all the frowns or smiles of the children of men, nor do I believe it ever will. Under this impulse I went to Barnes to inform my wife of my determination of leaving that place and forsaking all my companions, and that forever. And I gave her several reasons for this my determination, but concealed the worst of the matter. Her answer was, "Do just as you will. I'm ready to go with you to any place you choose." I have often since thought of good old Jacob sending for Rachel and Leah into the field to him to inform them of their father's conduct toward him, and of God's vision that was open to him, and of the Lord's commanding him to return into his own country, whose submissive answer was, "Now then, whatsoever God has said unto thee, do." Genesis 31:16. A sweet submissive reply, well becoming a pious helpmate. I now watched the hand of God to see if an opportunity offered for my departure, but every door seemed for a time to be shut. However, I kept close to my church, endeavored to shun all company, embraced every opportunity that offered itself to pour out my soul in prayer, and to show God my trouble. Nor did the deep concern I was under in the least abate, but heaviness of spirit, meekness, and humbling sorrow perpetually pursued me, and my mind was immersed in the meditations of futurity. After my wife had returned from her nursery, she had an awful dream, which in the morning she related to me. It was this, that the devil had appeared to her in her sleep with a most formidable aspect, and was going to lay hold of her, but she cried out, and he immediately left her, and made a violent seizure of me. I had not at that time told her much of my distress of mind, therefore she knew not how much the narrative of her dream contributed to the anguish of my spirit. I laid her words up and pondered them over in my heart, and as I believed her to be a very pious soul, I was fully persuaded I should, ere long, feel the effects of her dreadful vision, which God knows I soon did, as my reader will observe in the sequel. I had no thoughts of a violent temptation by divine permission assailing me, that should strip me of fleshly confidence, but what I expected was that death, judgment, and eternal damnation would be the dreadful result of her dream. Finding fresh troubles increase daily upon me, I longed to get out of the place I was then in, fearing that my companions would sometime or other entangle me and get me out a pleasure-taking on the Lord's day. For as I found that my power against sin was little worth, I wanted to shun even the appearance of temptation. I went over to Mr. Lowe's, a nurseryman at Hampton Wick, and asked him to employ me, which he accordingly did. It was now late in the autumn, but he promised to employ me till he could provide for me in another way. I endeavored to get a ready-furnished lodging at Kingston, but could not. I was therefore determined to walk to and fro from Kingston to Mortlake every day, rather than stay in that place, where I'd contracted an intimacy with several persons whose company I did not relish. I continued in this situation for about a fortnight, but at length got a lodging at Kingston. I was now determined never to get acquainted with any person unless he seemed to be religious, and, being in a strange place where I was not known, I had not so many temptations to draw me into company. I now took to reading any book that I could get, kept close to the church, kept up private and family prayer with my wife, and labored to recommend myself to the favor of God. I learned several little short prayers to repeat on the road as I walked, or at my labor, or on my bed, which I judged was redeeming lost time. However, I had one great difficulty to grapple with here, which was, we were obliged to go to a public house on a Saturday evening to receive our wages, where each laborer was compelled to spend 4 pence. This I could not avoid, though I found it a snare to me, because I was compelled to wait till the foreman had paid me, which sometimes would be as late as 8 or 9 o'clock. During this time I was obliged to hear all the songs that were sung and all their filthy conversation. This I found scattered all my religious thoughts, and made many breaches in that poor false peace which I had been patching up by the mere dint of hard labor. However, to close up these gaps, I generally worked the harder, said more prayers, read more, and got up earlier in the morning in order to perform a greater task. And so by these means I pacified conscience with a double portion of dead works. Hebrews 9:14. My fellow workmen, perceiving me to sit silent at the pay table while they were so jovial, and finding that I would not join with them for liquor when at work, they suspected I had caught a religious infection. Upon this I was set up as a butt for laughter and ridicule, and my bringing forth now and then a passage of Scripture to show the end they were like to make if they died in sin, as they then lived, this gave great offense, and exposed my head as a mark for every scorner upon which to spend his shafts. This I labored under for the space of many months. For a while they suspected me to be a Methodist, but finding I never went to the meeting, and that in every argument with them I pleaded for the church, their suspicion was that I wanted to be better than other people and to be more religious than was required of those who belonged to the Church of England. Having, as I thought, patched up a tolerable religion and redeemed a deal of lost time by labor, I began to be lifted up in my own mind and to be filled with a vain conceit of my own righteousness. Finding my zeal and diligence to continue, and from my being now habituated to this religious course of life, I began to have a very high opinion of my religion, and to judge myself righteous and despise others. Indeed, the language of my heart to most people was, "Stand by thyself, come not near unto me, for I am holier than thou." However, God permitted me to make several private slips in this my religious way of life, which brought fresh guilt on my conscience. This sting induced me to examine a little the root of my religion, and I found that I had no love to God in it, but that it was merely to pacify my conscience, escape the torments of hell, and to appear righteous before men. While I was perplexed with these thoughts, this was secretly suggested to my mind. Suppose you could continue this course of religion until the time of your death. You can only rub off as you go, and hardly that, for you offend daily in thought, word, and deed. And what is to become of all that black scroll that is behind? I found the more I meditated on these things, the deeper I sunk in distress. Therefore I tried to ease it from me, not liking to come to book. This put me a little out of conceit with my own righteousness. I thought there was something yet wanting on that head, and conscience lashing me within for past offences as well as for present blots, stopped me from boasting and showed me a little of the hypocrisy of my own heart. God beholds the proud afar off, and those that walk in pride he is able to debase. Daniel 4:37. I'm now going to relate what I am almost ashamed of, but still I am determined to let my reader see the dark as well as the shining side of the narrative. It was now toward the spring of the year, and I was extremely poor. My pay being very small and lodgings very dear, I bid much ado to live and keep my family decent and fit to appear at church. It fell out that I had bought a piece of bacon which had entirely emptied my pocket, so that though I wanted some vegetables to dress with it, I could not purchase any. I was therefore determined to go into a field belonging to my master in order to steal some turnip tops to boil with my bacon. I knew my fellow workmen had asked of my master, and he had granted them leave to get what they chose, but I had not asked leave, therefore my getting them was a theft. However, I went to the field, but while getting over the gate I was arrested in a most violent manner by my own conscience. I think an army of soldiers could not have stopped me more forcibly than the voice of God's vice-regent within. Indeed, I seemed as if I had been taken in a snare. I had no power to move for many minutes. I cried out, "What is it? What is it?" The answer was, "Thou shalt not steal." I replied, "My master gave leave to the men to get some vegetables." The answer came again, "You have not asked leave." I looked about me to see if I could discern any body speaking, but there was no body. The voice came from within. I sat and reasoned a great while, and was still answered. However, I saw no body. I thought it could be no great crime, therefore I was determined to get them, and accordingly went into the field, but was again rebuffed by the same powerful opposition of my own conscience, which drove me back again to the gate. I now stood and reasoned with myself what this voice and power could be. Whether it was my conscience or what, I could not tell, but certainly conscience had a hand in it. However, I was resolutely bent upon having the spoil, therefore I said I would inform my master of it the day following. Never was any poor creature more harassed than I was while stealing these things of so little value. I was obliged to gather them as fast as possible, and keep answering the voice, "I will acquaint my master of it. I will acquaint my master of it. I will acquaint my master of it," and then ran away as fast as I could. However, I never did acquaint him. Thus a man's own sins finds him out, Numbers 23:23, or as Bildad says, "The steps of his strength shall be straightened, and his own counsel shall cast him down. For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walks upon a snare. The gin shall take him by the heel, the snare is set for him in the ground, and a trap for him in the way. Terror shall make him afraid on every side, and shall drive him to his feet." Job 18:7-11. Indeed, extreme poverty is a snare to man, as well as the abundance of wealth. This, I believe, the pious Agar found, and therefore pray to be led between the two extremes. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee, and say, Who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. Proverbs 3:8 and 9. I had very sharp work to settle these matters with my conscience. It cost me many a secret groan, and discovered to me much of my own weakness afterwards. But I labored the harder to rub it off, and as I thought, in my old way of working. For I knew nothing of God's method of saving sinners freely by grace, therefore all my labor was but in vain. As it is written, Can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spots? Then may ye also do good that are accustomed to do evil. Jeremiah 13, verse 23. Having gone on many months with this legal yoke on my neck, laboring in my own strength, and drawing all my hopes of heaven from the law of Moses, which is the ministration of death and condemnation, it pleased God to strip me of all this self-sufficiency and legal hope in a very astonishing manner. For it came to pass one evening, as I was sitting by the fireside reading my Bible, I came to these words, At that day ye shall know that I am in my Father, and ye in me, and I in you. John 14:20. As soon as I had read these words, I began to consider them. Ye in me, and I in you? Alas, said I, what does that mean? I am wrong. My religion is little worth. I know nothing what these words mean. There is something of a secrecy between Christ and of those that he will save that I am yet ignorant of. While I was thus musing, behold, all the sins that I had ever been guilty of came up fresh on my mind, and all their deformity and malignant appearance, and stood arranged before my mind, even all my crimes from my childhood, so that I possessed the iniquity of my youth. Job 13:26. Seeing my sins in such a dreadful light, I began to have fearful apprehensions of God's awful displeasure, and immediately such an intolerable flood of divine wrath was poured forth on my guilty soul, that it swept away all my refuge of lies. This removed all my false hope, drove away all my vain props, and left me without one particle of that sandy foundation which I had laid for myself to stand upon, and down I went into the deep waters, where there was no standing, so that the floods overwhelmed me. Psalm 69:2. And I feared the pit would shut her mouth upon me. Isaiah 69:15. This wrath being so forcibly revealed against me, I began to have very hard thoughts of the Most High, and what is still worse, a mortal hatred to him, Romans 8:7. And immediately the devil was let loose upon me, and violently tempted me to blaspheme and curse the Almighty to his face. I leaped up with my eyes ready to start out of my head, my hair standing erect, and my countenance stained with all the horrible gloom and dismay of the damned. I cried out to my wife and said, Molly, I am undone forever. I am lost and gone. There is no hope nor mercy for me. You know not what a sinner I am. You know not where I am, nor what I feel. She seemed amazed at my appearance, asked what was the matter, and endeavored to comfort me, but all in vain, for the very name of mercy is but an aggravation of man's misery when all hope in God is dead. I went to bed and lay down in sorrow, but there was no rest for me. I thought the bed, the room, yea, and everything else was running round, and my soul was sinking so fast under the wrath of God that it was as if I fell 1,000 fathoms a minute. I dared not sleep, for if it did, I thought, like the rich feel, in hell I should lift up my eyes, for I was already in torment. At 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning I rose up and went downstairs, kneeled down to read the Bible, and attempted to pray, but oh, the horrid blasphemous temptation to blaspheme the Most High so foiled me that I dared not look up. I could only confess my sin, but could not say, God be merciful to me, a sinner. I went to work with my head swimming and legs staggering, like a drunken man. And when I get on Hampton Wick Green, I stood and viewed the horses, bullocks, and asses, and envied their happy state. Ah, said I, you have no sin to answer for, no judgment seat to appear before, no wrath from God to feel, no hell to fear. When you die, there is an end of you, but eternity is our lot. Oh, that I could die like you and be no more. Oh, that I was but in the place of the worst of you. But I am a man and a sinner, and hell aims at sinners. O wretched state, look which way I would my sin was ever before me. Psalm 51, verse 3. And my secret sins were set in the light of God's countenance. Within me there was the sting of death. 1 Corinthians 15:56. A guilty conscience, the worm that never dies. Mark 9:44. Still gnawing and feeding on my withered spirits. This made the leaf of my profession to wither, and my untimely fruit to fall like that of the olive. The thoughts of God's dam in me filled me with hard thoughts of him and even hatred to him. I felt the arrows of his wrath already within me, and I knew God had thrust me down. I fain would have fled of his hand, but could not. I offered to pray, I was tempted to blaspheme, and that stopped the mouth of my prayer. If I attempted to look up to God, my conscience smote me, and the heaviness appeared to be iron, and the earth brass, so that my thoughts could not fly with hope to God, nor could the earth hide me from his presence. Eternity I knew had no end, and hell I found by my sinking in despair had no bottom. The unfathomable abyss of eternity affords no anchorage, and the impassable gulf of God's fixed decree allows no vessel of wrath, fitted for destruction, ever to pass to the haven of rest, or make any other land or port whatsoever. Oh, what a profound deep, what a perilous navigation! Alas, I said, when I appear before him, my own mouth shall condemn me. If I would get above him, I cannot. He is the Most High and cannot be matched. If I speak of strength, lo, he is strong, and it of judgment. Who shall set me a time to plead? Job 19:9. He is of one mind, and none can turn him. Job 23:19. He is holy, and the guilty cannot approach him. He is light, and that discovers my sin. Therefore I hate it, for he has set them in the light of his countenance. He has often warned me, and I persisted. My conscience has checked me, and I opposed it with violence. He has brought me to death's door by sickness, and I vowed to him what I would do if he raised me up. He did so, but I broke all my vows. His patience is tired out. The verdict of my own thoughts casts me. My own heart condemns me. The curse of God is in my tabernacle. The wrath of God abides on me, John 3:36. The door of mercy is shut against me, and broad is the road, and wide the gate that leads to destruction, and many go in thereat. Oh, that I had never been born, Job 3:10. Oh, that no eye had ever seen me. Wherefore came I out of my mother's womb to see trouble. Oh, that there was no hell, no judgment to come, no God, no hereafter. Indeed, I experienced these words effectually. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Isaiah 33, verse 18. This is stumbling upon the dark mountains. This is sitting in the regions of the shadow of death. This is a horrible pit, and this is a miry clay. These are the deep waters where there is no standing. This is deep calling unto deep, but the noise of his waterspouts, while they are bursting and discharging their vengeance on the vessels of wrath, till both waves and billows go over. This is God shut him up a man, and there can be no opening. This is the employ of the damned. The chambers of death, Proverbs 7:27. The experience of devils, Matthew 12:43. The gloomy land of darkness without form or order, and the pains of hell, while the soul is harassed with the infernal intercourse and familiarity of devils, and your constant visitors and chief guests are in the depths of hell, Proverbs 9:18. No sinless perfection can live here. No atheism can live here. No deism nor Arminianism can ever flourish here. No, those principles can only flourish upon the hard soil of a benumbed conscience, seared with a hot iron and kept hard by the perpetual industry of the devil and the assistance of wicked company. But whenever God awakens such a conscience by letting his burning wrath into it, all those principles wither and die, both root and branch. Oh, how wretched the thought that such principles should grow and flourish in the minds of men, that never yet struck one root in the minds of devils, and that men should labor to propagate such a nursery for Satan in a land of hope and under the sunshine of mercy, that never could be found in the regions even of the damned. But why do I wonder at this? The reason is plain. The devil sends them all here because he cannot make them grow in hell. Here I was violently tempted to put an end to my existence, and to throw myself into the Thames. Long was I tempted to commit this rash act, and at times gathered comfort with the thoughts of it. But the consideration of guilt and wrath pursuing me beyond the grave often prevailed with me under that temptation. Oh, the subtlety of this old serpent! He even tempted the dear Redeemer to self-murder by wanting him to throw himself down from one of the pinnacles of the temple. As for that wretched temptation to curse all that was good, that constantly followed me, nor do I believe I was 1 hour free from it, unless when I was asleep, during 14 months together. I believe pious Job labored under this for many years, as appears by his suspicion of his children having been tempted to do it. As it is written, and he rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings, according to the number of them all. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually, Job 1:5. This is a main point that the devil labored to gain with Job when he accused him to God. But put forth thy hand now, he says, and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Job 1:11. And again the second time, but put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Job 2:5. And I am sure he would have done it had not the Almighty been the shield of his help. Deuteronomy 33:29. For there is no other shield but a bleeding Savior that can quench the fiery darts of the wicked. However, Satan left no stone unturned. He made Job's wife his engine for mischief. Then said his wife to him, Do you still retain your integrity? Curse God and die. Job 2:9. This also was Paul's thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan sent to buffet him, as may be gathered from thorns being a badge of the curse which sin brought upon the earth, Genesis 3:18, and from the parable of the thorny ground hearers, Matthew 13:7, and of Paul's comment on it, but that which bears thorns and briars is nigh unto cursing, whose end is to be burned, Hebrews 6:8. I believe Solomon was no stranger to this temptation by his leaving that caution upon record. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which has wings shall tell the matter. Satan soon filled Peter's mouth with oaths and curses when he had got him to sift, and he would have gone further if the Savior had not propped him up with his prayer that his faith may not fail. I believe this work of cursing to be the employment of all in hell, both devil and men, as it is the just sentence of God's righteous law. Therefore I believe that those in hell suffer under it, are perpetually spitting in the face of that righteous judge who passed the sentence on them, and therefore Satan labors to get poor sinners to begin with it here, thinking that when he has done this, he has gained his end. While I stood thus melting, mourning, and weeping over the birth, name, and sufferings of the Savior, I heard a voice saying to me, He that overcometh shall inherit all things. Revelation 21:7. Whether these words were in the Bible or not at that time, I didn't know. I inquired of several persons, but none could inform me. However, at length I found them out, but it was even some months after they were spoken to me. But to return, I went to my work, strongly convinced that God had a love for me. Yea, for several days together I had such a humbling sense of his loving kindness that I was sure he was with me, go wherever I would, and so strongly persuaded was I of his eternal affection to my soul, that I was sure neither men nor devils could possibly hurt me any more than they could hurt the apple of God's eye. Zechariah 2:8. This caused me to go melting in my soul and weeping and praying all the day long under the sweet influence of such unmerited love that flowed in to dissolve so hard and so impenitent a heart as mine. The temptation, however, had not left me. I still had the thorn in my flesh, or the devil's curses darting from his stronghold, which is the old man of sin, the flesh, or the natural corruption of the heart, that is the devil's own garrison. This messenger of Satan buffeted me perpetually from that fort. But all this while, as the presence of the Lord was with me, it lost its usual force. It was like storming a stronghold with bladders, or as Paul says, God's grace was sufficient, though the thorn was not taken away, 2 Corinthians 12:7 and 9. And in this situation he could glory even in the midst of his infirmities under the influence of sovereign grace. When the following Sabbath arrived, I went to Kingston Church as usual. After the sermon there, an anthem was sung, which concluded with the word Alleluia in a very pleasing manner, and was repeated often by each part and party. While they were singing this anthem, I was enwrapped in such a glorious frame of soul as I never before felt. Whether I was in the body or out of the body for a few minutes, I could scarcely tell, but blessed be God, I have enjoyed much of the same sort since, and I know not that it came from God. It was some of the good old wine, and that I found when the Lord sent me a little of it the second time. I believe I shall never desire new, for I am certain the old is better. Luke 5:39. After this never-to-be-forgotten Sabbath was over, I was shortly stripped of all joy, meekness, hope, and help, and left to sink again into the deep and gloomy regions of horror, and the blasphemous temptation pursued me with more violence than ever. To make my case a more desperate, I was violently tempted to believe that there was no God. Having been a little indulged with the comforts and joys of hope before the storm appeared, it was rendered more aggravating and violent than ever. However, I read my Bible and prayed to God day and night. But what made my cause still more desperate, 2 passages of Scripture were brought to my mind with all their cutting energy and power. One was, "But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account thereof in the day of judgment," Matthew 12:36. And the other was, "We know that whosoever is born of God sins not," 1 John 5:18. These passages snapped my cable and drove me apparently from all anchorage in God. And finding my hope removed, I was forced into all the billows of wrath, temptation, corruption, distress, horror, and despondency that any mortal could possibly be in. This drove me to my wits' end. I was now again tempted to end a strife by leaping into the Thames, and so putting a period to my own existence. Still, however, God prevented me. I felt those distresses the keener from the circumstances of my having a strong faith in the justice of God. I was sure that he must be faithful to his threatenings or cease to be truth, and consequently cease to be God. And though I had been much comforted before in my own soul, yet I had no light nor judgment in the Word of God, nor was I able to understand any passages but those which leveled their force and just sentences at me for sin. Again this temptation recurred that there was no God, nor any judgment to come, and that the Holy Bible was false. Therefore I had no occasion to tremble at the word, Psalm 14:1. These temptations being suitable to my wishes, I labored hard to credit them, and to persuade myself there were none. Yea, I wished in my heart that these suggestions were true, for then I should end in annihilation, and like the happy brute be no more. But I could gain no safety there, though I fain would, for the storm of God's wrath soon drove me from these moorings. Therefore I knew that atheism and deism cannot live in an awakened soul, even in this life, and if a man lifts up his eyes in hell, he will soon see a just God, and feel the torments of his wrath too, and that will destroy all his atheism at once, for he may as soon persuade himself out of a sense of his punishment as out of the existence of the just punisher. In this deplorable state I knew not where to go. I was poor and obliged to work hard, though I had hard work enough within. And these violent blasphemous suggestions I feared would one day or other break loose, and that then I should be dispatched immediately from the land of the living. And indeed it certainly would have so happened had not the Almighty set a watch before my mouth, and by his own power kept the door of my lips. The ever-blessed Lord brought his promise afresh to my mind again one day as I was at labor. He that overcometh shall inherit all things. And it was impressed powerfully on my mind that this was a battle that I was to fight, and in which I must overcome if I inherited all things. But if I lost this field, then all was lost forever, as my poor distracted mind conjectured. Upon this I was contriving what method to adopt in order to overcome in this battle. And it was suddenly brought to my mind that I should bless the name of the Lord every time the fiery dart came, and to continue to pray both day and night. I immediately began blessing the name of the Lord, and this temptation began to come faster and with more violence than ever, sometimes 4 or 5 times in a minute, for days and months together. But still I repeated as fast as I could speak, "Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed," and so on. I kept shaking my head for fear I should listen to it and mutter it out unawares. I have been sometimes harassed in this manner till I have been quite weary and almost senseless, and so far gone as not to be able to give any person a reasonable answer, nor even to conceive aright what I was about. My fellow workmen, seeing me perpetually in motion, and my lips muttering, concluded that I was mad, and dealt with me accordingly. I now found that my rationality was sometimes amazingly impaired, insomuch that I was hardly capable either of labor or conversation. At times I was so sorely tried that I was afraid I should begin to tear my hair, cry out loud, and run distracted. But I thought if I did, I should run mad immediately, and then all would be lost. I perceived this to be the enemy's aim, first to impair my faculties, and then he could make me curse and swear as he pleased. But in opposition to this, I perpetually prayed and blessed the name of the Lord, and still was insensibly supported by my gracious God in this doubtful engagement. Moving forward in this narrative of William Huntington, I found that this long and severe trial wonderfully weakened my body as well as impaired my reason. It brought me almost to death's door. My life, hanging perpetually in doubt before me, tried my temper amazingly, till at last I gave way so much to peevishness and fretfulness that I was quite a burden to myself and to my family. And indeed it is a rare thing to see a sensible criminal cheerful when the sentence of death is passed on him. It is a bad sign in a literal, but much worse in a spiritual sense. I still persevered in reading, though I did not understand the meaning of what I read, unless it were those passages that leveled their threatenings at me. And I still kept on praying, though my prayers were nothing but confusion. Nor did I give up blessing the Lord while I was under those wretched temptations. I labored hard also for many months together to keep the Sabbath day holy, putting great confidence in that act of obedience, if I could but have compassed my design. But alas, I never kept one Lord's Day holy all the time I was in that despairing way, for something or other occurred to put me out of temper on that day above all the days in the week. I have often been tempted to rise by 3 o'clock on the Lord's Day morning and go into some distant wood, and there stay till night, that I might not see anybody to provoke me to anger. For many months I was harassed with this temptation, but alas, there is no more real religion in a wood than on board a ship, when this heart is destitute of the grace of God. I often thought my wife behaved more contrary to me while in this state than ever she had done before. This made me have very hard thoughts of her. However, no family can be happy where allegorical Hagar or the law of Moses keeps house. My reader must go and learn what that means. At this time my wife knew not what cunning convictions were, therefore could form no judgment of my case, and I believe I tried her patience very severely. For my life was a burden to myself, and I went mourning all the day long. I labored as hard when at church to keep my mind and thoughts on a minister as I did to keep the Sabbath, and had just as much success, for I could not stay my thoughts on the prayers or sermon any more than I could create a world. Not even at private prayer, for my thoughts were flurried and confused by the devil, or chained down to the horrors of despair, so that, as Paul says, I could not speak a good word or think a good thought. Nor is there a man living that can, if he is truly convinced of sin. For the Savior declares that without him man can do nothing, John 15:5, and I am sure he cannot unless the Spirit of Christ condescends to work in him both the will and the do. This is dying to the law, and a long lingering death I had of it, as it is written, I was alive without the law, Romans 7:9. But when the commandment came, that is, with its convincing power and in its spiritual meaning, sin revived and I died. But sin, taken occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law sin was dead. For sin, taken occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it slew me. And the commandment which was ordained a life I found to be unto death. And thrice happy is that soul who is dead to the law, to all hope in it, and to all expectation from it, for such a soul is alive to God through Jesus Christ, and shall live by faith here, and in the full fruition of God hereafter, and that to all eternity. But perhaps my reader has never been in these deep waters, and therefore is troubled in his mind, fearing he has neither part nor lot in the matter. To which I answer, you are not to limit the Holy One of Israel. Has God blessed you with a godly sorrow? For it is that which works repentance unto salvation, not to be repented of, 2 Corinthians 7:10. Let not my reader therefore desire to travel through these regions of confusion. If you are a child of God, you will meet with as much of it as your faith will be able to manage. God had a particular work for me to do, and therefore he qualified me accordingly. Gospel ministers are called fishers of men, and some mystical fish that are to be caught are playing among the rocks of error. Some of the serpentine kind, like eels, are crawling in the mire, and some are swimming on the surface of pleasure and vanity. Each of these chosen ones must have its particular hook, Amos 4:2, or net, Matthew 13:47. My design in writing this book is to fish for those in the mud or among the rocks, and therefore I bait my hook with the very same bait which caught me. For this cause also I have spoken very plainly about my temptations, for which I shall possibly be highly blamed by some who are not very well acquainted with heart work. But wherefore should I regard that, seeing my testimony is that, and that only, which I received from God, who revealed his Son in me? Not a word of it is either feigned, forged, or borrowed. No man shall stop me of this boasting in all the regions of Britain. David says he will make his boast of God all the day long, and tell others what God has done for his soul. I know there are many poor souls who lie under very grievous temptations, and yet are tempted never to reveal their case. For Satan knows that a skillful hand under God would weaken his stronghold. Therefore he attempts such to be his privy counsel. For we know he is not divided against himself. If he was, his kingdom would be destroyed. Howbeit I am determined to write plainly about my temptations, as far as I can find them mentioned or hinted at in the Scriptures. And those very black ones, which the Scriptures are silent about, I will keep to myself, unless there be any poor buffeted soul, who thinks his temptations to be without a parallel. Such an one shall be welcome to a private conference with me. What has much encouraged me to write this treatise is that God has been pleased to bring many deeply tried souls into gospel liberty under my ministry, while the ministry of some others has floated too much on the surface for them. As for infidelity, I know she will give this testimony of God to lie, and indeed I should wonder if she did not, seeing that God has declared twice in his word that she shall do it. As it is written, Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you, Habakkuk 1:5. And again, behold, ye despisers, and wonder and perish, for I work a work in your days, a work which ye shall in no wise believe, though a man declare it to you, Acts 13:41. But shall their unbelief make the faith of God without effect? God forbid. Yea, let God be true, and every man a liar, Romans 3:3 and 4. I find in Scripture that many professors gave the testimony of Paul the lie, though they saw that the Lord set his broad seal to it as a proof that it was from him. And those who were sealed under the sound of his testimony brought forth fruit to the glory of the great sealer. I believe I shall ever have cause to bless the Almighty for bringing me the way that he did, though it appeared perilous, for it has made me more useful to others, and has also been a mean under God of effectually fixing my heart, and shielding me from many false doctrines that abound in our day. I've always thought those ministers who have been well stripped by a law work and brought out in a conspicuous manner by the revelation of Christ to their consciences never stink so rank of Arminianism or popery as those who are not acquainted with the plague of their own hearts. And their trumpet generally gives a more certain sound. They are most skillful also with a wounded conscience, and such will ever be attended with the choicest flock. If my reader be a poor, tempted, dejected soul, he will long to put a few questions to me, which I conjecture may be these. He will say in his heart, I have heard of your convictions, and of the convictions that have exercised others also. I have read of the cutting convictions of Isaiah, David, Job, Paul, and others. I have also read of the convictions of Cain, Judas, Ahab, and Saul, and I cannot distinguish the one from the other. David says, I have sinned, and Job says, I have sinned. What shall I answer thee? And Judas says, I have sinned and betrayed innocent blood. David says, my sin is my sore burden and too heavy for me to bear. And Cain says, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Their distresses and confessions are almost alike, says my reader, and I am afraid my convictions are those of the latter class which you have mentioned. Now I want to know the difference between the convictions which end in gospel conversion and those of the reprobate or apostate, which lead to black despair or to hardness of heart and desperate wickedness. You have asked me, I confess, a hard, puzzling question, and you ought to be wisely and soundly answered from the oracles of God, as a hasty, unscriptural solution may be attended for a time with bad consequences. I will therefore, as God may enable me, give my reader as good an answer as he can expect from an illiterate coalheaver. I read a book some time ago written by a very great man who seemed to cast all law work aside and said it ought not to be regarded, but I trust I shall be enabled to set that forth in a scriptural point of view. We know there must be a beginning and a labor too before there can be a birth, and so it is with God's children. There is a labor sooner or later, more or less, to bring them all forth, as it is written, they are begotten by the word of truth, James 1:18. They labor and are in pain to bring forth, Micah 4:10, and are born again of the Holy Ghost, John 3:5, and then perfect love casts out fear, and glorious liberty from bondage takes place. First, what is it to convince a man of sin? It is to prove a man guilty by the laws of God and of conscience, so as to persuade his mind that he is a transgressor of those laws, and to bring him to acknowledge it, either by confession, by a fallen countenance like Cain, or by a guilty silence like the adulterous woman, which proves he has nothing but guilty to plead, and therefore ceases to plead at all. The man has these witnesses brought in against him: first, his own thoughts; secondly, his own conscience; thirdly, the voice of a holy God and his righteous law, which threefold testimony is sure to convict him. Then the sentence of that law is revealed, which is a death warrant from the legal ministration, and it stops the sinner's mouth, and he appears condemned by the law of God, so that he cannot disown but that the sentence is justly due to him, and the judge strictly just in denouncing that sentence. Secondly, what will convince a man of sin, and yet leave him without the grace of God? I answer, the eye of God's justice, fishing upon a rebel in his mad career of sin, and a visible view of the hand of God going out against him, may convince him of his acting diametrically opposite to the will of his Maker, as it is written. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily. So that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Exodus 14:24 and 25. Secondly, when the lips of truth appeal to a man's conscience and bring him to a proper reflection, insomuch that he is internally convicted from a conscious knowledge of his being guilty of the crime for which the lips of truth have made their appeal to him, as it is written, So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said to them, He that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own consciences, mark that, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. John 8:7 and 9. Thirdly, a judgment denounced from the mouth of a minister against a sinner for his sin. After the sin has been described by a preacher, though erroneous preachers contradict it and try to heal the wound, this will convince a man, as is seen in the days of Ahab. Micaiah declares he shall not return from the field of battle in peace, and is hated and imprisoned for it. 400 false prophets declare that he shall prosper, and the Lord shall deliver the victory into the hand of the king. And these prophets please the king well, for they prophesy good to the king with one voice. Surely they ought to please their own master, for they were prophets of his own making, and were kept at his own expense, and the devil was in them all, as you read in 1 Kings 22:23. Notwithstanding all this, the death denounced by old Micaiah stuck close to his conscience, as it is written, And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself, and enter into the battle, but put thou on thy robes. And the king of Israel disguised himself, and went into the battle. 1 Kings 22:30. Honest conscience pleaded powerfully against the promised success of 400 prophets, and the prediction of good old Micaiah was fulfilled at Ramoth-Gilead by an arrow sent from a venturous bow, which gave him his death wound, and his royal blood became in consequence a banquet for dogs. Fourthly, a man who has been much in the company of the righteous has at times felt a superficial spark of joy from their fire, and has been an eyewitness of the providences and salvation of God in a temporal way, and who after all this turns an enemy to the righteous, whom he knows God favors, and he may at times convince a sinner and bring him to confession, as may be seen in the case of Saul. Return, my son David, thou art more righteous than I have rewarded thee evil when thou hast saved my life. Thou shalt surely be king. Fifthly, a question put to a guilty sinner, either by God himself in a way of judgment or by the mouth of his ministers, will at times convict a sinner and send a painful arrow into his heart. As it is written, Cain, where is Abel thy brother? Thy brother's blood cries. This brought down his countenance, nor could it ever stand afterward. Now, what effect had all these convictions upon these men? Did they bring them to confess their sins to God? No, only to men. God fights against us, said the host of Pharaoh. Were their eyes toward God for any help? No, they hated the light. Did their convictions bring them to God? No, they ran further from him. Did they pray to him? No. Had they any hope in him? No. Were they convinced of the evil of their own hearts? No. Were they convinced of unbelief? No. Were they brought to hate sin and loathe themselves on the account of it? No, they sinned with a higher hand and were yet more desperate. In like manner, Ahab goes to battle. Saul also continues to persecute David, and even has recourse to the witch of Endor. This has been a reading of The Kingdom of Heaven, taken by force by William Huntington.